Is progressive Christianity in trouble? Two stories. This was such a big story last week. It was picked up both by the New York Times and the Atlantic with big stories. Does the death of Pope Francis signify that progressive Christianity is in trouble? For 12 years, Pope Francis was the most powerful Christian on the world stage, using his voice to elevate the poor and the marginalized. Millions of progressive Christians in the United States, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, considered him to be a powerful counterweight to a rising conservative Christian power. He was the magnetic center for their values. His death leaves a question gnawing inside their minds like a rabbit in a jet engine. In a world without Pope Francis, where their values feel particularly vulnerable, where do they go from here?
I think Jesus is a good alternative.
Where do they go? Oh? There's nowhere to go, Sky. Bishop Sean Rowe, presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, said, "For those of us who want to embody the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes and the love that Jesus showed in the world, this is now more important than ever." What's this, you ask? He said, this moment. This moment is now more important than this moment has ever been before. I'm not sure what that means. Politics are certainly co-opting Christian language and the Christian story. It is now ours to take that back. Many conservative Christians, including Protestants, viewed Pope Francis skeptically. To them, the Pope was soft on doctrinal matters and risked pushing all of Christendom to surrender its core teachings. The Atlantic wrote an article with the headline, "Progressive Christianity's Bleak Future." Things are getting bleak. Pope Francis leaves behind a church that is moving away from the faith he championed. In his final Easter address, Pope Francis touched on one of the major themes of his 12-year papacy, that love, hope, and peace are possible. How much contempt is stirred up at times toward the vulnerable, the marginalized, and migrants. He did it. He went there. He said migrants. He mentioned migrants. Sky.
Yeah.
His opponents were mainly conservatives of various stripes, some traditionalists upset by his relative coldness toward the Latin liturgy, some members of the political right frustrated with his unwillingness to spiritually cooperate in their socio-political projects. Thus, some conservatives were positively delighted by Francis's death. Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted, "Today there were major shifts in global leadership. Evil is being defeated by the hand of God." So I think she just said that God killed the Pope.
And that the Pope is evil.
Yeah, so that's cool.
Both of these pieces, and to the credit of the reporters, this is not entirely their fault. I think there could have been some more nuance in the reporting, but a lot of it has to do with just the analysis that they are reporting about from leaders in various Christian denominations. I have a couple of frustrations. My main one is I just think it's disingenuous to say that there is just like conservative Christians as like a monolith that all believe the same things and believe the same politics, et cetera. And then there's just this monolith of progressive Christians that cuts across denominational differences, cuts across political differences, and just sort of believes the same things. And a lot of the quotes they pulled basically were like, there's the bad Christians that are the conservative Christian nationalist types, and then there's us good ones that want to be like Jesus and follow the Sermon on the Mount. And I think it's disingenuous to claim there is a monolith of progressive Christians that kind of can be defined and then studied, but also to say that a lot of the progressive Christians, even some of the ones that are referenced here, like leaders in the Episcopal Church in the US, to say that they were like looking to Pope Francis as a guide for their theology or political activism is nuts. Like they just weren't doing, they could value him as a leader. It's absolutely true that you could say he did really important things in the context he was in. He wrote really important documents of Christian theology that I have drawn on. But to make it sound like they were in agreement totally with him or that they were doing the same things he was doing is just not accurate. There's a ton of different ways of being a conservative Christian or being a progressive Christian. And a lot of the folks that represent publicly progressive Christianity today would and have had very harsh criticisms of Pope Francis. Yeah. One, for being from a church that has a pretty hierarchical structure, that has a male-only priesthood, that has very harsh condemnations of birth control and abortion access. Like, they weren't fans of him in totality. And he represents a very different way of thinking about a Christian witness in the political world, thinking about Christian ethics. Sky and I just recorded a whole Getting Schooled about Catholic social teaching and all the things that Pope Francis is inheriting and drawing on as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. So just to say that there's this like monolith of progressive Christians and ask, is it on the ascendancy or on the decline because of the death of this important leader? I just think is not nuanced enough. It doesn't accurately describe denominational differences, and it doesn't accurately describe how political differences and religious theological differences relate to each other.
Caitlin, I just need you to do something for me. Define progressive Christianity. What is it?
I don't know. I mean, that part of what's frustrating here is what I tend to mean when I say progressive Christianity, when I'm talking to people generally, is a form of Christianity that takes some of its political cues from the political left, as opposed to pretty conservative Christians that take some of their cues from the political right. But even saying that just now, that's kind of some of what the articles are getting at. And it makes me uncomfortable because it can be a helpful shorthand when you're not going to get into all the details, but it doesn't accurately describe what most people on the ground are doing. And really importantly, when it comes to American Protestants who would describe themselves as progressive, they are a world away, theologically and politically, from who Pope Francis was, from who any Catholic Pope could be. And to just mash it all together and say, this is progressive Christianity doesn't do justice to Pope Francis. Yeah. And it doesn't help us accurately understand what's going on with Christian political activism in the U.S., because it makes it sound like within this monolith of progressive Christians, they're following the Sermon on the Mount and just doing what Jesus said, when there's a huge subset of progressive Christians. And I say this with love for many dear people I work with and am around at the Divinity School at Duke, with people who I'm good friends with on the internet, who I really think need someone to say, you're kind of doing the same thing that conservative Christians are doing, and that you found your political cues from not just the general left, not just from the Democratic Party, but from kind of the far end of the political left. And you have found Christian language to baptize that in the worst form, or even just to kind of coincide with it in the best form. But you're not taking your cues solely from scripture or Christian theology like everyone wants to claim they are. You're taking a lot of your cues from the activists on the political left.
Yeah. It seems to me that both of these articles start with the framework of the current American political moment, and then push the Pope through that framework and decide, because I'm ignoring these things, he's clearly on the left in American politics. And then people on the right are doing the same thing. I'm ignoring these things, the things that I actually agree with that he says or that the church teaches, and I'm just focusing on the things that, we're getting upset about today. Sky?
That's exactly what these articles
Sermon
do.
illustration?
No sermon illustration. But to Caitlin's point, by any measure, theologically, Pope Francis is a conservative. Mm-hmm. And any cardinal in the Catholic Church these days pretty much is going to be a theological conservative. And what I mean by a theological conservative is somebody who takes the supernatural teachings and doctrines of the faith seriously and affirms the orthodox creeds of the church, like the Nicene Creed. And that's a theological conservative. There are Christians, progressive Christians out there who, not all, but some would deny the virgin birth. They would deny the resurrection. They would deny all kinds of the inerrancy of scripture, all that kind of stuff. They would deny that. And you can be a theologically conservative Christian and have either politically progressive or conservative politics.
And hopefully both.
And depending on the issue.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
So to your point, Phil, they take Pope Francis and push him through the lens of American political spectrum, conservative or progressive, ignoring his theological conservatism, and then draw conclusions based on that. Right. And it's just, it doesn't serve a theologically or religiously ignorant reader. These articles, because it gives you false categories, and you need to redefine the categories before you explain. the Pope.
So another way to have approached these two articles would be to say North American Christians who appreciated Pope Francis's tone on immigration and the poor are wondering who will be the next voice to promote those causes that cut against the grain in American Christianity today.
Yeah, but I think
that'd have been a good article.
Yes, and I would have added the reason the Pope said what he said about migrants and the poor was not because he was a progressive.
Right.
It was because he was a theological conservative and took the teachings of Jesus seriously.
Well, I just think we need to leave those bucket terms out of the article completely and don't say what's happening to progressive Christianity. Just think what's happening to the church's view on immigration and the poor post Pope Francis.
And part of my frustration with all of this is that sometimes these framings unintentionally seed certain pretty central, pretty historic Christian positions on certain issues to the left. Like, it is a progressive Christian thing to care about the poor. No, it is like one of the earliest, most consistent, most scriptural commands for Christians to care about the poor. Or when it comes to immigration, huge theme throughout Scripture, tons of historical evidence of Christians caring about foreigners. So I just get frustrated when it's like, well, these are the progressive Christians. It's like, well, some of the political voices you can put in those buckets, you can put along that spectrum politically. But unintentionally, you end up basically telling people the conservatives are the ones that are going back to the original. They're the ones that are sort of like the stodgy, old-fashioned ones that aren't willing to change with the times. And it's like, no, so many of the things that Pope Francis cared about that we put in a progressive political camp are not changing with the times. They are staying consistent with Christian teaching and doctrine throughout time.
The other thing that annoyed me, especially about the New York Times article, is they made it sound like Christianity in the West, both Roman Catholics in America and even evangelicals in America, are gaining ground because they're rejecting the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. And that the progressives are losing ground because they're sticking with the Sermon on the Mount. And that's ignoring a whole lot of other factors that are going on here. Like, yeah. So
but simplicity is easier for us to digest.